I was actually assuming a role which I had never done in my career before. In April of 2020, COVID hit us. We had Big Billion Days, which was a very popular event time, crazy time at Flipkart, right? We would bring in mattresses for people to sleep during the night. There were sessions brought to employee desks. So there will be periods of time where we said, stop everything that you're doing. In the peak of my career, there was a blackout episode that happened to me personally. I was drinking from a fire hose in terms of the domain. Maybe employees are not availing of it because they believe that if they avail of these programs, they would get actually bypassed on careers, on growth.
Yeah, I think these are very real fears that people have. Hey everybody, welcome to Close the Loop. Ryan Singh here. Really excited for today's episode where we get to hear about the vast experience of our guest today, who's Krishna Raghavan, who's the Chief People Officer at the Nudge Institute. And we get to talk today about a topic that's very close to my heart, which is preventative health, and specifically what companies are doing to boost kind of employee health and well-being, and some of the bright spots and initiatives. We're still very early, I think, as an industry in corporate wellness, corporate well-being, on really making an impact and really making a difference. But I think it starts at the top. It starts with people who have a vision and a desire to make those changes. And I think Krishna is definitely one of those people, as you'll get to hear today.
Thank you so much, Ryan, for having me here.
Yeah, likewise. I think you have a sort of an illustrious and unique background coming from actually leading engineering teams now to leading people. I think anyone who probably sees your LinkedIn would be most curious about the transition and how do you like move from a career so deep, maybe in like product and technology, and to the people side of things.
Yeah, it's definitely a question that I get often asked, and like I always say, I think the first 20 years was about following my head, and the last 5-6 years have been following my heart in terms of what I think where my superpowers lie, in terms of really working with people, nurturing them to become the best versions of themselves. And that's what gave me tremendous joy when I took up the role at Flipkart as well. And I've continued my journey ever since.
Yeah. And maybe if you just want to briefly give the audience a little timeline of the places you've been, just so they get a sense of where you're coming from.
Yeah, sure. Ryan, I'm happy to do that. I think, like you said, I think I was a techie all the way through initial period of my career. I went to a liberal arts school in the US, did both math and computer science in a liberal arts kind of setting. I think that set the stage for me in terms of my outlook to life in general. Very multidisciplinary, cross-functional, able to appreciate other backgrounds was something that was set in motion for me very early on. And then I went through an engineering career. I mostly chose product startups, startups in particular, and product companies, because the joy of creation was something that always brought me in, something usually where I had to don multiple hats again. Again, it goes back to the connection of, the multidisciplinary approach that I was trained in. So I did most of my techie early career in that. And then
wanted to make stuff,
create, craft stuff, but do it also with different disciplines, operating like an engineer for a bit, maybe product, doing program management, figuring out how sales and marketing happens on this product. So different sort of aspects to it. Did that for a long period of time, grew through the ranks like any techie would do, took up management as well, because I think I had choices in terms of whether I wanted to become an individual contributor or a manager, and I chose the management path again for the love of people. And I didn't know that deeply at that time in terms of what I wanted to do with regards to managing teams. Took up that career and I continued through. I relocated back to India. I have always had a strong desire to come back to India, and I did that. And I've worked in, again, product companies at Yahoo, at Future Group, and at Flipkart. And Flipkart was my longest stint for about 10 years, where I assumed both a technology role, but my first foray into a chief people officer role as well, into HR. That's what happened at Flipkart. And then Navi, which is Sachin Bansal's next startup that he wanted to disrupt within the fintech space, and it covers insurance as well. And then now most recently, just about 8 months back, wanted to dive into the social sector, and that's when the Nudge Institute happened.
Yeah.
So that's a bit about my journey so far.
Yeah, yeah. And maybe before we get on the topic of health, there's so many interesting stops on your career journey that I'd love to spend like 20 minutes on, but maybe the one that is really relevant to the audience. There's a lot of folks who maybe like have an affinity for people as they lead sort of business or technical teams. They realize, wow, actually the management or the people and culture side of this is really what I enjoy. Was there a moment for you where you kind of realized, oh, maybe like CPO is what even made you apply, right? I mean, that's.
Yeah, there's a good backstory and an authentic backstory to it. I think from an engineering standpoint, we measure people metrics as well, right? And I think Flipkart had a great practice of looking at people metrics in the same vein as business metrics. So every manager, director, vice president would get rated on attrition, employee engagement, top talent retention, mood sentiment score, and all of that. And my scores were generally the best in the org. So there was a bit of what was I doing within my teams that spurred this kind of employee sentiment and engagement was one thing that I could take away.
Yeah.
The second thing for me was I became a life and leadership coach in 2019. And through that immersive exercise, I think one of the things that they make you do is really go core deep within, and not to sound too metaphysical and spiritual, but they sort of go deep within your core to understand what are you here meant to do on this planet. And one of the things the answers came out to me is actually I'm a conduit to actually help and nurture people. And that realization combined with already evidence that I was good at something sort of gave me the conviction, and I said, what the heck do I have to lose? I may apply for a career in HR. Maybe I might be crappy at it once I get into it, but I can get back to a career in engineering. And having accumulated certain degree of financial freedom at a later point in my time in my career, it gave me the courage and the conviction to go knock on the door of my CEO and say, you know what, I want to apply for this role. Kind enough he was that he didn't sort of outright reject me and throw me out. He said, apply for it, you'll go through the interview process and we'll treat you as yet another candidate. And if you make it through, you make it through. So that's how I actually got the role.
That soul-searching piece, I mean, it's not too metaphysical, I think. I do think that's like something we should be talking about more because people are very confused and I think I think we need to eat some more spiritual soup sometimes, right? Like what are we really doing? So no, that's interesting. I think also your point about being financially privileged, being in a position where you already have enough proof of work you've kind of de-risked some parts of life. I think that's also it's great you highlighted that because that is really important in taking such a big leap.
Yeah, absolutely.
When you joined Flipkart, I mean, you were there when there was almost only 400-ish employees. When you left, almost 25,000 plus. Crazy journey. So many aspects of it that we can talk about. But wanted to specifically, I think we decided let's talk about health, right? Let's talk about how did you think about you jumped into the CPO role first. You had comp and ben as just one part of what you're doing, right?
Absolutely.
And health as just one part of that. How did you think about it? What was your strategy on it? Was it even something that in the early days you paid a lot of attention to? And maybe, how did this become a topic that you really cared about?
Yeah. Actually, it's a very interesting question that you ask, Ryan. In the initial period, honestly, it was about fixing the house within the function. So I spent maybe the first year fixing a lot of basic things, hygiene in the function. Only I think in the second year, I started to sort of put out my thoughts on what is the purpose of the function within Flipkart, within the context of Flipkart, right? And that's where actually the entire genesis of this conversation starts, which is we had coined the purpose to be empower every Flipster to maximize their potential and well-being. That was our purpose statement. And when we put that out, well-being was very much a core part of it. So how could it not flow into the strategy of everything that we do? From our visioning exercise, what sort of initiatives should we plan out for our employees? And I took over, by the way, in 2019 towards the end. And little did I know, in April of 2020, COVID hit us. in India.
Yeah, I was going to, did something happen?
Yeah, it was just absolutely crazy. And I was new in the role. I was actually assuming a role which I had never done in my career before. I was drinking from a fire hose in terms of the domain.
Right.
I had to understand the HR domain. And at the same time, COVID hit. So this purpose statement really helped me anchor during the COVID times to design even all the benefits that we have in mind for our employees. What do we mean maximize well-being?
How did you even get well-being in that statement?
Yeah.
Right? I feel like for so many companies, even because mission statements are debated. Every single word is a you steel man and straw man. You try to figure out what's the core, right?
Yeah.
How did the team, and I'm sure it was a team kind of decision.
It was absolutely a team effort.
How did the team come to add well-being in the mission statement?
Yeah. So when we thought about like a human being, even outside the context of a corporate landscape, there are two aspects which always enable us to be the best version of ourselves. Like one is, what are my innate skills? Am I even aware of it? And can I discover it in a place like a corporate workplace? Because most of the times we get into a career and we'll end up doing something maybe because of preconceived notions, peer pressure. So do I allow an employee to come and exist in an organization and say, you know what, I might actually be better at doing something else. And that's where the whole maximizing of potential comes into play. But equally important is I can't go further in that journey without well-being being center of me. Because if I'm not physically, in a good place, if I'm not mentally in a good place, I may pick out the best career. I may even want to stay in the same career that I joined the organization. But I won't be able to advance. I won't be able to maximize myself. So when we thought about a human being, we said at the core, there are these two aspects. How can I maximize your potential? And how can I maximize your well-being? And that's what sort of became sort of like central to everything that we do.
I mean, when you phrase it that way, it seems obvious.
Yeah.
Shouldn't every company sort of look at it that way? I mean, I think there's a lot of first principles thinking and truth seeking to get to that point and say, no, these are the two things that matter, actually. So well-being was core, COVID happened. I mean, there's obviously probably lots of standardized things that we did about COVID response across the industry, but is there anything that you're particularly proud of, maybe from the COVID and post-COVID time that you guys did at Flipkart?
Yeah, I think like you said, a lot of companies globally didn't have a playbook. Everybody was reacting to it. If somebody said, we had a ready-made playbook for tackling something like COVID, no, they would be lying, right? So we didn't have a playbook either. We built one over time. But as we walked through the first wave and as we entered the second wave in India, and I'm calling these waves as we know, right, in common parlance, I think it became very apparent to us that the biggest stress on employees was the what-if scenarios. If somebody were to fall sick, and some of these situations in hospitals were prolonged stays as well. So how could I even support myself with a medical insurance that I had signed up for based on all my judgment, but now that was actually proving to be inadequate. So I think the proudest moment for me personally, even till now, to date actually, is when we launched unlimited medical insurance. And obviously no insurance provider was giving you that option in India at that time. But we just decided to put a hack together at the back end and said, we'll create this corpus, we'll figure out the risk profile. But if you're able to sort of take the risk, then for the employee, it's a black box. They shouldn't care how we manage it in the back end. But we should be able to offer this at least to employees, if not their families, to begin with.
It was a front of house promise, right?
Yeah.
Regardless of how it was structured, etc. But and I think there was a case where that.
Yeah, absolutely right. There was a case. We had a vice president who fell terribly sick in wave 2, got into major medical complications, had a situation, had to be put on a ventilator, and the ventilator stay was prolonged, and we know how much a ventilator costs per day in major hospitals in India.
And I think what we realized during COVID and after, I think a lot of companies went back and revised their coverage. And this core thing, which was kind of an expectation, for a lot of companies, I think they realized, wow, this is actually super important. So I think there was this renewed sense of like, oh wow, employee benefits actually really matter. Corporate health insurance really matters. And what we also saw was a lot of folks, rather than just focusing on the payment for healthcare, they're focusing on the healthcare itself,
Yeah.
right? In this case, I'm sure the team probably worked with the employees to guide some of their care, say, here's a good doctor, maybe here's a bed. I think a lot of companies started realizing it's not about paying for healthcare. Paying for healthcare might be the easy part because
Yeah.
our insurer will do that. But getting a bed, finding the right doctor, getting at-home care, knowing what the rules are for coming back to work. I think people started focusing on the healthcare bit and not just the payment of it,
Yeah.
right? Do you see, in any of the stints that you've had, maybe since Flipkart also, how have you been able to focus on, the insurance piece is there, sure, it's the payment, but how about that healthcare piece, right? Our workforce, our employees, our teams, they're waking up at 2 a.m. for their kids who are crying about some cough. They're trying to find a cancer second opinion for their dad. They're dealing with their mother's hip replacement, which is looming on the weekend. I think these are all things that live in people's heads. Like, has there been anything that you've been able to do or maybe see from your peers that, here's a company really focusing on the healthcare piece?
No, I think it's a great question. I think the insurance pieces are almost covered in most organizations, and people are really trying to push the envelope, right, on that. And companies are getting better and better. They're increasing limits. They're covering a variety of treatments,
Right.
and all of that, and different types of situations, life situations that one might find themselves in.
Yeah.
But I think for me, it occurred to me, if I can say, from my own personal example, right? Like, I actually, while I was working in the peak of my career, there was a blackout episode that happened to me personally.
Oh, wow.
And I actually, literally blacked out, and I fell straight on my face.
In the office, outside of the office?
At home.
Oh, at home.
At home, right? And this was in the middle of the night.
Oh, wow.
And then when I went to check all my parameters, my cholesterol was high, my blood pressure was high, my weight, I think my BMI was off big time. And I'd accumulated a lot of, I would say, over time, not focused on my health.
Sure.
And it was sort of a personal sort of a story for me itself, right? Awakening for me. And to the point where actually right now I'm a long distance runner, I'm a marathoner.
Yeah.
And
Nice.
all my medications have gone, right? And none of those conditions exist anymore for me.
Yeah.
So for me, it became a personal story in terms of how I look at even prevention. And from a personal story standpoint, how does that make a difference before the thing even happens?
Right.
And that should be the focus of organizations. So therefore, when we looked at the earlier mission or purpose statement that we had on maximizing well-being,
Right.
we said, how can we move away from just providing the best insurance benefits to preventive healthcare?
Sure.
And what did we do in that direction is actually we first focused on looking at what does prevention mean, and we broke down the problem into aspects of physical well-being, mental well-being, financial well-being, social well-being,
Sure.
and then said under each of these categories, what can we do from providing benefits to employees?
Yeah.
So on physical, the usual things, right? Like the annual health checkups that people don't take by default, even if you offer them. Pretty much every insurance program at every organization covers annual health checkups. But let's look at what is the adoption rate. How many under 40, under 30 employees go and pick up those? Look at the stats.
Right.
It's actually abysmal.
Yeah.
It's in single digits at best. And companies may not talk about this data, but it's actually right there. So
And
only when an event occurs.
Insurers will definitely, when they offer it, realize we're offering it knowing that
there's a lot of breakage.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
So what we did is we brought annual checkups to them. We started doing blood draws in office.
Oh, cool. Yeah,
we did annual health camps. And through that, I can tell you one example is where a colleague of mine was in their early 30s and was discovered that he had very high cholesterol. And he was completely blindsided by the fact that he had high cholesterol. And the conversation with him changed completely thereafter.
Yeah.
It became, let me go join a cult. We had all these programs, by the way. We had memberships, tie-ups with cult and so forth. But again, the take-up was very low because people, the awareness of doing something about my health from a preventive lens is still very low according to me.
Totally.
So I think the aspect of breaking down the problem and communicating this proposition to employees, saying that when you think about health in these different angles.
Yeah.
Physical, mental, social, financial.
Correct.
Under every one of these, we started to create a lot of awareness programs. And we communicated the heck out of it. I believe in this sense, over communication is a must.
Right.
To the point where people are like, okay, this is yet another email.
Yeah.
And we started to create a lot of sponsors in the system. People who were early adopters, talking about their stories and real stories. Having like typical sort of, I would say, evening sessions where we would organize 3-4 people come together and talk about the impact of a particular physical practice that they started.
Nice.
And sort of do that. So that's what we did. We started
kind of like a organic conversation series that you guys started around some health topics.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. No, I think one, I totally agree. I think the annual health checkup is a great thing. It's great that it's become commonplace because in many countries, the idea of coming into the office and getting a blood draw, it's actually not a standard practice. I do think that's one amazing thing that's pretty normalized now in the Indian kind of corporate environment is, hey, like, yeah, my company probably will be doing this for me. And increasingly, even if I don't want it for myself or I don't need it today, I can do it for my spouse at the same time. We can get discounts and stuff. So I think that's really great. And but there's kind of two different ways of getting on a health journey, right? I think one is your story where you had this incident, right? This traumatic experience, and I think you had the resolve and maybe the discipline or some sort of initiative that you took then to say, this is enough. Yeah. I need to fix this and start running way too far every day. Right? I think other people, right? Ultimately, a lot of HR teams and HR leaders that I meet, people leaders that I meet, they say, we can bring people to the water, but we can't make them drink. Right?
Yeah,
I think, and that's this lament or this, expression of sadness around, we do so much, but nobody's really taking it up. Yeah. Right? We have a gym membership, we have all these programs, but we're sad as a people team that people aren't adopting these things. So, from that perspective, right? Like you did that resolve to kind of get on your own health journey. Like, is there anything, what do you see as the role of a company in inspiring people to get on their health journey?
Yeah.
Because ultimately they have to wake up in the morning, put their shoes on and go for that walk or that run, right?
Yeah. Or anything that they like.
Or whatever that might be. Right?
Yeah. No, I think, like you said, you can provide the best of sort of programs, benefits, but people have to avail of it. And unfortunately, health is something which many a times is taken too reactively, like in my case, rather than proactively. And there's a wake-up call that happens and people take to it, right? So I think the approach or strategy for organizations ought to be, one is obviously having the best you can offer, right? But let's talk about how it is well supported by organizations in big, really critical times. Does business triumph health as well? Like I can give you an example.
Yeah, sure.
So if you're working through, we had Big Billion Days, which was a very popular event time,
right.
Crazy time at Flipkart, right?
Right.
During those times, do you provide avenues for employees to actually take a break? Even when business really matters to the organization to the point where maybe a chunk of the revenue comes in those 5 days or 6 days.
Correct.
Do you actually put that to test in terms of moments that matter?
Yeah.
We had situations where we would bring in mattresses for people to sleep during the night. There were sessions brought to employee desks. So there will be periods of time where we said, stop everything that you're doing. Let's engage in a mindfulness activity.
Nice.
We had a room specifically for meditation, mindfulness.
Yeah.
And we encouraged employees to go avail of that as well.
Yeah.
Right? So it's also not just about when we say we can't make people drink. I think what organizations fail to do at times is how can you also support the employee in the journey specifically when situations are difficult at work. Do you have policies that actually enable them to make that transition rather than just saying that we have a program, go avail of it?
Right.
That I don't think is good enough. I'll give you another example. When you have a mom returning from a maternity break, like you said, there are challenges at home. There's an infant that's probably crying because he or she is colic. You know, the mother has had
Some
a
important
sleepless
stuff
night.
happening at home. Yeah.
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 Do you have policies that truly allow a mother to have a part work, part pay program, which they can avail of? And by the way, a promotion is not denied to them because they're doing part work, part pay. Their ratings are still as good if they're producing the output of work that they're supposed to produce.
Yeah.
I think it's in these follow-throughs that companies fail and say that employees are not availing of it. Maybe employees are not availing of it because they believe that if they avail of these programs, they would get actually bypassed on careers, on growth,
Right.
and things of that nature.
Or in that 5-day big billions period,
Yeah,
the perception of a manager won't be so great.
Yeah.
So I shouldn't go meditate. Right?
exactly.
Yeah.
exactly.
I think these are very real fears that people have.
So I think that's where I think just not having benefits, but actually following through and supporting the employee to make that transition
Yeah.
is going to be super important.
How did you get managers bought in? Right. I think that's where it comes. That's where rubber hits the road. Right. People team can do whatever they can, maybe through HRBPs and things, but ultimately, managers at the company, leaders at the company, to really adopt it and I think practice what they preach. Very easier said than done. Any tips for the audience there in terms of how do you really bring them along?
Yeah, I think for a manager to care about the well-being of their team, it seems quite obvious that you would care about it. But I think many managers are not even aware that there's something wrong with a particular person in terms of they're experiencing burnout. So what are the things that we did is when we moved away from these annual surveys to continuous listening as a methodology that we employed. And we partnered with a company to deploy that product within the organization that I worked for, right? Is that we got almost like a mood score and we also would get a nuance on things like well-being. If a team was experiencing burnout, we would actually get some signals from these various listening products or tools that we were deploying.
Yeah.
And this would almost be flashed quite immediately real time to the HRBP of that supporting team as well as to the manager.
Yeah.
And it would matter to the manager because frankly speaking, I'm sort of dumbing it down to some extent here, Ryan. It would matter because if burnout happens, it potentially would lead to lower engagement, higher attrition, and therefore a ding on the manager as well.
True.
In their ratings, their rewards, and so forth. So you have to also kind of make it important for a manager, not just from a soft angle, but potentially from a hard angle as well. It should matter, right?
Yeah.
So both these, I think, are the strategies that at least we employed to be able to actually have more manager buy-in around this topic.
Yeah, no, I think that's very clear. And maybe that's the troublesome answer for certain companies, because crossing that chasm is difficult. But I think what you outlined is like actually a really practical, easy way to do it. I think the getting well-being into the mission statement of the people function over there was like a great masterstroke, and I think it sets everything up very nicely. I think until you have that real commitment at the org level, and it's hard to kind of pull it through then, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot changing today in the world of managing teams and building companies. We talk about AI on one side, taking away jobs, but on the other side, empowering people and giving them tools.
Yeah.
Obviously, I think things are going to get even faster paced, more dynamic. Need for teams to work and learn rapidly is going to continue to go. So, it seems like with rapid pace, folks might say, "Hey, I'm already running really, really fast in whatever work that I'm doing. Will I have to run faster?" Right. So I do think there is definitely some anxiety in the workforce today where, folks are questioning, am I future ready, right? I think there's new anxieties probably creeping up due to some of these changes. Where do you think this is all going?
Yeah, that's a great question, actually, Ryan. I think probably there's more anxiety right now, especially with the advent of AI. But if we were to sort of rewind, I think when we had a lot of automation take place via a lot of, say, computers that came in, there was also anxiety about loss of jobs then, right?
Yeah, sure.
And if you notice, a new class of jobs got created because of the computers coming into our workplaces. I do believe, yes, there would be certain types of jobs that would probably become redundant, but I think new jobs will emerge, right? And at the core of this problem, I would believe that it's about going back to basics and talking about, am I skilling myself to become future ready, and how are organizations supporting that journey for employees? It's kind of a little bit beyond healthcare in general as well, but it definitely talks about well-being. And what I mean by this is the aspect of, are you truly investing in learning and development, not as a checkbox in organizations, but are you crafting individualized, bespoke plans for employees, which they co-create?
Yeah.
We used to use this famous phrase that careers are employee owned, right? Manager facilitated and organization supported.
Right.
And for me, that perfectly sums up how you should think about sort of careers in the future in a very chaotic, fast changing world with the advent or entrance of AI as well into our jobs. And if companies are able to provide that sort of assurance, not from that your job is always going to be here, but am I upskilling you? Am I supporting you on this journey? And having that safety, that psychological safety to also express yourself in an organization and say, this role ain't for me right now, I need to transition to this role.
Right.
Supporting that, I think, will go a long way in enabling well-being for employees. Because what is well-being? I spend 10, 12 hours in a workplace, probably far more than even my sleeping hours in my waking life, in my life in general, not just waking life, right?
Yeah.
And if I'm not well supported in terms of the furtherance of my career, will I not be anxious? Will it not impact everything in my well-being, both mental and possibly manifesting into physical aspects as well? I think for me that's paramount, and that's what employees and employers should think about as we progress in this AI age.
Yeah. I think that's the right philosophy on it, and I think all the tactical strategies and programs would follow from that. But maybe to summarize, it's keep something explicit about well-being as part of the real mission, and then help lessen the anxiety of people preparing for this future and get managers bought in, and that can really help people. Great conversation today. I think this has been really a pleasure for me to chat through. I think your experiences across a lot of different places definitely inform, I think, what we heard today, and excited to keep chatting. I think there's going to be a big future, specifically on employee health and well-being, how we kind of look at the future of work. So maybe we'll have you back on in like a year, and we'll sort of figure out how much we've changed in our careers and how much our teams have changed with some of these tools. So thanks so much for joining us, and hope to see you again.
Thank you so much, Ryan. I mean, all your questions were so insightful, and it was very, very natural and conversational. So thank you so much for having me.
Cool.